Let's go. Here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. Checks in puzzle position are Queen to f5, check. Queen to e6, check. Queen to g5, check. Queen to g7, check. Queen to h5, check. Queen to g3, check. Queen to e2, check. Queen to f4, check. Queen to e4, check. Queen to d4, check. Answer to this puzzle is Queen to e6, check. King to f4. Queen to e3, checkmate. Another puzzle. The threats are Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is Queen to h6. Rook to g8. Queen takes pawn, check. King takes queen. Rook to h3, check. King to g6. Rook to h6, checkmate. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop, check. The checks are Queen to f7, check. Queen to e8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to h7, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Rook to h8, check. Answer to this puzzle is Queen takes bishop, check. Queen to f7. Rook takes pawn, check. King takes rook. Queen to h6, check. King to g8. Queen to h8, checkmate. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Bishop takes pawn, check. Here are the checks. Queen to b6, check. Bishop to c6, check. Bishop to e4, check. Bishop to f3, check. Bishop to g2, check. Bishop to h1, check. Bishop to c4, check. Bishop to b3, check. Bishop takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen to b6, check. King to c3. Queen to c5, check. King to d2. Queen to f2, check. King to d1. Bishop to f3, checkmate. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes pawn. The checks are Queen to g2, check. Queen to h1, check. Queen to e1, check. Queen to b1, check. Answer to this puzzle is Queen to b1, check. King to g2. h3, check. King takes pawn. Queen to f1, checkmate. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Knight takes pawn. The checks are Bishop to e7, check. The best move in puzzle position is Bishop to e7, check. King takes bishop. Rook takes bishop, check. Rook takes rook. Queen to d7, check. King to f8. Queen to f7, checkmate. Another puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are Queen takes bishop, check. Queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to f7, check. Queen to h8, check. Queen to g6, check. Queen to h6, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Knight to g7, check. Knight takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is Knight to g7, check. King to h4. Queen to g6. Knight to f4. Rook takes knight. Queen takes knight, check. King to h7. Queen to h8, check. King takes queen. Pawn takes rook. Queen to h5, check. King to g3. Queen to h3, checkmate. Another one. The threats are Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. King takes bishop. Rook takes bishop. Checks in this position are Knight to c7, check. Knight to d8, check. Knight to f8, check. Knight to g7, check. Knight to g5, check. Knight to d4, check. Knight to c5, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is Knight to g5, check. Queen to e4. Rook takes queen, check. Pawn takes rook. Queen takes pawn, check. King to d8. Knight to e6, checkmate. One more. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn. The checks are h5, check. Queen to e2, check. Queen to g2, check. The best move in puzzle position is Queen to g2, check. Knight to g3. h5, check. King takes pawn. Queen to f3, check. King to g5. Queen takes knight, check. King to f5. Queen to g6, checkmate. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: queen takes rook, check. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check. Pawn takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Checks in puzzle position are: queen to g7, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to h7, check. Queen to h8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using: queen takes pawn, check. Knight to g7. Rook to h8, check. King takes rook. Queen to h6, check. King to g8. g6. Rook to f5. Queen to h7, check. King to f8. Queen to h8, checkmate. Another puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook. Pawn takes pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Pawn takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is: queen takes pawn, check. King to h8. King to h6. Queen to e7. Bishop to c3, check. Knight to e5. Queen takes queen. a5. Queen to g7, checkmate. Another puzzle. The threats are: rook takes pawn, check. Rook takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. Here are the checks. Rook takes pawn, check. g5, check. The best move in puzzle position is g5, check. King to h5. Rook to f4. e5. Bishop to e2, check. Bishop to g4. Rook takes bishop. a4. Rook takes pawn, checkmate. Another puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: knight takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn. The checks are: knight to f4, check. Knight takes pawn, check. The answer is: knight to f4, check. King to f1. Queen to c1, check. Bishop to d1. Queen takes bishop, checkmate. Next, threats in this position are: knight takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are: queen takes pawn, check. Queen to g2, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen to g2, check. King takes queen. Knight to f4, check. King to g1. Knight to h3, checkmate. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are: queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn. Knight takes bishop. Rook takes bishop. Here are the checks. Queen to g7, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Knight to f6, check. The best move in puzzle position is knight to f6, check. Pawn takes knight. Queen takes rook, check. King takes queen. Bishop to h6, check. King to g8. Rook to e8, checkmate. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are: rook takes pawn. Here are the checks. Knight to d5, check. Knight to c4, check. Promotes to knight, check. Rook to h3, check. Solution to the puzzle is: promotes to knight, check. Bishop takes knight. Knight to d5, checkmate. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: queen takes bishop, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are: a6, check. Knight to b8, check. Knight to d8, check. Knight to d4, check. Knight to b4, check. Knight to a5, check. Queen to b3, check. Queen to a4, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is a6, check. King to b6. Queen to f2, check. Bishop to e3. Queen takes bishop, check. d4. Queen takes pawn, check. King takes pawn. Queen to a7, checkmate. Let's see the next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are: Bishop to g5, check. Queen to g5, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to f2, check. Queen to e1, check. Queen to f4, check. Solution to the puzzle is Queen to f4, check. King to e1. Bishop to h4, check. King to e2. Knight to d4, checkmate. Next puzzle, here are the threats. Rook takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check. Checks in puzzle position are Knight to d8, check. Knight to h8, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight to g5, check. Knight to e5, check. Knight to d6, check. Solution to the puzzle is Knight to h8, check. Knight to e7. Rook takes knight, check. King takes knight. Rook to d8, checkmate. Next puzzle, here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight. Rook takes pawn, check. Here are the checks. Queen to g6, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook takes pawn, check. King to g8. Rook to h8, check. King to f7. Queen takes pawn, check. King takes queen. Rook to h7, checkmate. Let's continue. Threats in this position are Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen to g5, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to g3, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to g4, check. Answer to this puzzle is Queen to g5, check. King to f1. Knight to g4. Bishop to f7, check. King takes bishop. Knight to g2. Knight takes pawn, check. King to g1. Queen takes knight, checkmate. One more. Threats in this position are Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Here are the checks. d4, check. Rook to f5, check. The puzzle is solved using d4, check. King takes pawn. Rook to d1, check. King to e5. Rook to f5, checkmate. Next, the threats are Queen takes bishop. The checks are Queen to g8, check. f2, check. Answer to this puzzle is Queen to g8, check. King to f2. Queen to g2, check. King to e3. Queen to e2, check. King to f4. Knight to h5, check. King to g5. Queen to g2, check. King takes knight. Queen to g6, check. King to h4. Bishop to f6, check. Bishop to g5. Queen takes bishop, check. King to h3. Queen to g2, checkmate. One more. The threats are Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are Queen to g2, check. Queen to h1, check. The best move in puzzle position is Queen to g2, check. King takes queen. Knight takes pawn, check. King to g1. Rook takes rook, checkmate. One more. The threats are there are no threats in this position. The checks are e5, check. g5, check. Rook to f3, check. The puzzle is solved using g5, check. Pawn takes pawn. e5, check. Pawn takes pawn, check. Pawn takes pawn, check. King to f5. Rook to f3, checkmate. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.